This tutorial uses some textures from our sister company Polygon. Sign up for a free account by clicking the link in the description. It's the final part of level 3. Level 3. I don't know. I just wanted to start with the cringiest intro ever, and that's what I came up with. So we're going to be adding condensation, a texture, to our cup here. And to do that, we have to do UV unwrapping. And that's really the whole reason why we've even got this step in here. Condensation isn't that necessary for something like this, but it's an excuse to learn about UV unwrapping, okay? So UV unwrapping, you remember we talked about it briefly when we had the donut and we were gonna paint it, and I explained it's like a chocolate that's been wrapped up. But then I showed you that we were kind of lucky because the donut came pre-UV unwrap, so we didn't really have to do anything. The cup, no such luck. So we've modeled it ourselves, which means we have to do the UV unwrapping. Okay, so to explain this, it is probably best if we just quickly, I'll do this quickly, explain it on something a little simpler than a cup, okay? The way I like to think of UV unwrapping, and it's helped me whenever I'm going about creating something, is imagining that this object is made out of paper, and I want to flatten that paper and I want to put it flat onto a surface. And in order to do that, I've got a pair of scissors with me, and I have to choose where am I gonna cut in order to lay it flat, okay? And this is very helpful for me because I remember as a kid, I made like a paper dice. We should just call them dice. Die sounds ridiculous even if it's a single one. Dice. I made a single dice, and it was made of paper, and I had to do this, and it's just like burned in my mind, right? So imagine this is made of paper. I want to lay it flat. Where do I put those cuts? Okay, so there is a UV editing tab, which is what we're going to be using to UV unwrap something, and by default it's come already UV unwrap because it's a cube. So let me just cheat, reset it, because we're gonna do it ourselves. Okay, so in order to put these cuts in, right, I'm gonna use edge select mode. Don't follow along with this, right? This is just for like demonstration purposes. You can sit back and relax and enjoy a donut if you happen to have one laying around. Anyway, so where would I put a cut? Let's put 3 cuts in the top here. Okay, so I'm going to hit Control E, and this is how you would add in a cut, by the way. Control E for E, elephant. We'll go with elephant. Mark seam, that's the one you select. Now those there are outlined as red, and that means those are going to be cut. Then I would hit U, select everything, hit U, and then unwrap. Okay, now this is the result that I've got. Now you can see like something's going on, but it's probably not right. And there's these weird bits that are all sort of squished together. This is part of our UV unwrapping, which has come out perfectly. That's a square, right? So that part has been done correct. The rest of it not so, because it's all squished in together. It doesn't know what to do. So let's try putting in another cut and another cut. I'll put 2 cuts in here. I'll hit Control E, mark seam, U, unwrap. Haha, looking a little closer, right? Like it's almost flattened out. It's almost flattened out on the table, but there's still not enough cuts. You can see that this part here and this part here need to have a seam as well, right? So that's that line there and this line here. So now that I've done that, Control E, mark seam, unwrap, and there we go. Okay, so that's how you do it. You put 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Is it 8? 7? It's 7 cuts. 7 cuts in order to outline this six-sided cube here, right? So that's a very simple object, and I hope that didn't confuse you at all, but I wanted to demonstrate it on something a little simpler. So now we have our cup. Where on earth do we put these cuts? So imagine it's made of paper. If you want to lay it out flat, how on earth are you going to possibly do this? Well, you got to put some cuts in there, right? So the first thing is like, lengthways, like just cut it like in half and like rip it apart, right? So let's put a cut right here, okay? Doesn't really matter. I mean, you could put it like anywhere, but where you put a cut, we'll get to this later with texturing, but you sometimes see a little visible seam. So it helps if you can put it next to something else that's going to hide it. So I'm putting it next to this handle. But anyway, so by the way, I'm holding down Alt and I'm left clicking on that, and I'm in edge select mode, which by the way, if you want a hotkey for like switching between vertice, edge, or face, it's 1, 2, and 3 on your keyboard. You can get my shortcut PDF. Somebody should make a compilation video of every time I've referred people to my shortcut PDF. I want a supercut version of that. But anyways, okay, so I've selected that. Control E, mark seam, okay? By the way, selecting everything, you can see part of it is UV unwrapped, but that was because it was originally a cylinder. But this is almost certainly completely wrong now that we've done all this modeling. So now I'm gonna hit U, then select unwrap. Haha, so we have something. It's trying to stretch it out. It's doing a weird sort of job, but yeah, it's coming along okay. Now, this part down here is our handle, right? This part here. And that looks really, really wrong. Now, there's nothing that says the UV... these are called UV islands. There's nothing that says it has to be one single piece. The cube, we did it in one piece, but it could be as many pieces as you want. There's different ideas of like if you're trying to save for texture space and blah, blah, blah. You can get really deep into the weeds on that. But the point is we can just cut this off, like make this its own separate object, which is often a better idea when you've got like different types of geometry that don't really blend in together or fit. You just cut them off and make them separate objects. So I'm cutting that off by hitting Control E, mark seam, and do that. Okay, so this is our handle here. Now, our handle doesn't need to be UV unwrapped because, I mean, there's not going to be any condensation in it. But if we were, we could put a seam right here. So I could just put a seam right down the middle there. You unwrap, and now you can see this is our handle, right? So you can see how it's starting to like peel it and flatten it out so it looks recognizable, right? By the way, when we hit U, you can see there's something down there that says object has non-uniform scale, which means it will operate on a non-scaled version of it. Basically means this is becoming distorted because if we hit N for Nelly to open up the properties, you can see that we've got underneath scale, these two values here aren't as 1, okay? So in order to make them 1, we need to apply our scale. So if we hit Control A in object mode only, Control A, scale, you can see these have been reset to 1. And now when we do this, you should see this will change a little bit. There you go. Not much. Sometimes it's drastic, but if you ever see that warning, you basically need to apply the scale and UV unwrap it so that it works properly. It's an annoying bug, honestly. Oh, not a bug. Feature designed to work like that, I have no idea, but it is annoying because it's like, yeah, the only, like, of course it has to be, the scale has to be applied. I don't even know why it's doing the operation if the scale isn't applied. I don't know. Too much information. Anyway, all right, so we've got part of it working. You can see down here, like this is all connected together because right in the center of our cup, and let me just Alt Z so we can focus on it, and the clipping is way too close. So let's just, there we go. So I need to, for each of these circles down here, I need to also make them seams, right? Those two circles. So Control E, mark seam, U, unwrap. Haha, so you can see that it's starting to open it up, like it's broken that apart because these circles are now able to be free and, be off by themselves. Okay, now, this weirdness is happening because, like, if this was a cylinder, this would be a lot easier because the lines would be straight and it would know what to do. But this is not a cylinder. This is like a tapered in thing. And there's not really an easy way to UV unwrap it that isn't going to end up with a shape like this. The old way that I used to fix this like older versions of Blender was to try to like flatten it out because you can grab vertices over here, you can rotate them, you can scale them and try and make them flat, and I would try and make these grid shapes because like a grid flat square lines like that often looks a lot better, and it's easier like to work with like a texture when we come to our condensation if these lines are like, if these are squares or at least uniform shapes than what they are currently. But there's not really an easy way to do it until I discovered that there is an add-on which does not come with Blender by default, but I'm putting a link to this in the description. It's called UV Squares. So if you enable this add-on, you enable it, then when you go to N for your properties down here, N for Nelly, you've got something called UV Squares. And then if you just select the mesh by hitting L, so you click any vertice or just anywhere in it, basically, L, then if you hit to grid by shape, that will happen. Dun, dun, dun. So it's just magically converted all that craziness into it's actually like uniform. Like, yeah, it's tried to make a grid shape out of it based on what it had, and it's done a pretty dang good job. And now that I know that this add-on exists, I only just started using it probably for this, I don't know, like a couple of months. And it's already like, I don't know how I got by without it. So make sure you get that add-on because it is a lifesaver. So now that we've done this, our job is complete. It's UV unwrapped adequately enough that we can at least start to see how something would look with a texture, and we can come back and fix this if needs be. But now that that is done, I'm going to go back to the layout section over here, and now we can apply a new material to just the inside of our glass here, which I believe is another first for this series, unless I'm mistaken. We haven't talked about how to use multiple materials on one object, right? So our cup, we've got a material to it. It's called glass at the top there, but we want to keep glass. We want to keep the glass material on some parts of the glass, but the inside, specifically this like top part of the inside of our cup, we want to have a separate material to it that looks like condensation. So the way you add another material to the mesh when you've already got another material already on it is you click this little plus button, right, which is adding a new material slot. And with this new material, you could select an existing one from anything in your scene. Oh, look, I've already got one there because I'm re-recording this little bit. But anyways, you could add a new material or whatever. Now, in our case, I want to reuse this glass material right here. So I'm going to select glass from the list here, and then I'm going to click this little button next to it to make it a single user. And I will call this condensation. Haha. Okay, now, if we were to go into render view mode, you would see that nothing has changed, and nothing should change because we haven't assigned parts of the mesh to it, and also this is the exact same material as before. But let's just, so that we can differentiate between the two, let's make this condensation material a red material so that we can visibly see it, okay? So right now, nothing has changed because our material is still using just the top slot for our whole object here. So the way you make it use the second slot is by going into edit mode and then selecting parts of your mesh. Let's go solid view here and then X-ray mode so that I can see it. You select parts of your mesh that you want to have the separate material to. So as I mentioned, we want parts of the inside, basically just above the liquid line here. On just the inside of the glass. So if we select our cup here, you can see that, oh, miraculously, look at that. Our mesh just happens to line up so perfectly with where the liquid ends. Almost like that was done deliberately. So I'm selecting that ring there by holding down Alt and left clicking, right? So you can do that along here. And then if you hold down Shift while you do it, you can select all those faces there, okay? So I've got all the parts that I want to apply to this new material here called condensation. So the way you do it is by hitting that assign button there, okay? Now you only see this, by the way, in edit mode. If you're in object mode, you don't see any assign button because you have to be in edit mode in order to assign something to it, okay? So now that we've done that, if we go back to the rendered view mode, haha, look at this. It is working as expected. So this part here is red and the rest of it is coming up as clear. So it's working as we had hoped. So the base color, just set that all the way back to saturation, fully white, okay? So it's now blending in exactly with the glass. What we want to do now is give it that condensation look. So condensation on glass, it's like, yeah, like where there's differing of temperatures and it's making little bubbles form on the glass there. So as it just so happens to be, we have, I have a website which I created 3 years ago, full of textures, which I've been promoting all throughout this series. You've seen at the start, I go, brought to you by Polygon, and I hand myself a wad of cash, as someone said. But basically, it's a bunch of different textures, and we're going to be using one of them. And it is this one right here. So this is a special texture that we made just for something like this. Like you got raindrops on a window or you've got condensation. This is what we're going to use. So I put a link to this in the description. If you're watching this at the time we release it, you don't even have to sign up for a Polygon account. You can just download it because I haven't actually set this material as free. But if you're watching that after this material should be free. So you just have to sign up for a free account on Polygon and then you can download this for free. Now the only map that you actually need is the normals map, normals 16-bit. Okay, so once you've got that, you can also change the resolution. If you want to go like super high res, you can, but honestly, 1K is going to be just fine. The higher resolution you go for, by the way, the more memory is going to be used in when you do a render. So the higher res texture, like I know a lot of beginners are like, oh, always get the highest res. Yeah, you can, but you're also going to pay for it with increased memory usage. So I try to use as lower size as I can get away with. So 1K is probably, it's going to be just fine. So 1K, normal 16-bit. If you're wondering, by the way, what's the difference between normals and normal 16-bit? 16-bit is like, it's getting a little advanced, but it's like, you'll get like almost what looks like JPEG compression or like stepping issues if you're using something that is an 8-bit version, like a JPEG for a normal map. Don't worry about that if that makes no sense to you. I don't blame you. But anyways, download that. You'll get a zip file. You're going to unzip that zip file, and then you can continue with the rest of this. So with our condensation material there selected, we're going to go to the shading panel, which is enabling us to see, you know, the same detail as over here, but it's now putting it in node form, right? Which is helpful. So to add in the texture that we've just downloaded, we're going to hit Shift A, then go Texture, Image Texture, and then I'm going to hit Open, locate wherever it is that you have downloaded the texture to. So here it is, water droplets, and in there you'll see like a folder called Regular. Then the size, 1K. So this is the material right here, normal 16. Doesn't matter what size is, whatever you've got, just click that, and then we're gonna hit Open Image. Okay, so this, if we were to look at what this looks like, which we can do with the Node Wrangler add-on, the viewer thing, this is what it looks like, right? So it's this bluish, weirdish, it's a purple looking texture, right? That's a normal map. A normal map always looks like this. It makes no sense to you as a human being, but to the computer goes, haha, I know what to do with this. Pretend that it's geometry and make it look, you know, like reflections and shadows and things. So it's a special type of material that basically doesn't cost anything when you render, but it adds detail in for free. And it's amazing, especially for something like this where you've got like little bubbles on the inside of a glass. You don't want to have to pay for that by modeling and sculpting all that stuff in. This is the perfect job for a normal map, okay? Now, the way that you use a normal map on our shader here is we want to take this, the normal map, and we want to plug this into the normal input right here. If we were to just do that, plug it in, normal map like that, this would happen. Wrong, wrong. Never do it like that. Well, that's the first bit. But between here and here, you have to add in a Shift A, vector, normal map. And this will convert the color into a normal map that the software can actually read. And you can see that it's now coming out almost correct, but before you proceed, you also have to set the color space for your normal map from sRGB to non-color. And you do that because it is a normal map. And because there is a bug in Blender 2.81, which I've yet to report, but I should, when we did that, nothing actually changed. It didn't refresh, it didn't change anything. So I'm just gonna refresh that by unplugging it and plugging it back in. And now it is correct. So this is now using the correct input. Sorry, the correct values, and we now have condensation on the inside of our glass. But wait, it looks like somebody has instead smeared Vaseline or lube or whatever it is, some sort of jellied substance. These droplets are way too big, okay? So this goes back to our UV unwrapping, okay? So if we go to the UV image editor, this is our mug, and this is the UV squares over the top of the image, okay? Now, if we go into Look Dev mode, this little button at the top there, this is what it looks like, okay? which, you know, it's not looking, it's using the Eevee renderer to preview the textures over it. It's not going to look exactly like the render, but it's close enough. You can see what it's doing to it, okay? So if I was to increase the scale of this grid here by hitting S and then increasing that, you can see that these bubbles now become smaller, right? Because the grid is now occupying more space over the texture. Okay, now there's really only one part of this material that's actually being used, like it's just the top part of this ring here. We've got the whole mug here, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to scale it all up. All this other stuff, the handle, the little circles down there that aren't being used, all the rest of the mug that's not being used, the texture is like it's still showing it over in the UV image editor, but it's not being used anywhere because the material stack is using the glass, which has no texture on it everywhere else. So that's just sort of how this UV unwrapping thing works. Yeah. You'll get the hang of it. You'll get the hang of it. I'm going to select L to select that entire island there. And then you just want to scale this up until like the size looks okay. Now, one thing you'll note if you get right in here, you'll notice that the aspect ratio is a little bit off, okay? Because these things look like they're kind of being stretched that way. And when you have that problem, it just means that you have to stretch your UV squares in a different axis. So for one, I'm just going to rotate this like this. Actually, no, flip it. I'll make the part with the mug, because I know that this is the part with the handle, because I can see there's that little line that's out of place. So I know that's the handle. This is the part that'll be like, so now it's actually like accurate to the rotation of it. It doesn't really matter, but it just helps me think about it. So I know this is the part of the mug, okay? Now that I've got this, if I scale, if I hit S and then X, I'm going to be scaling along the X axis. And when I do that, you can see that these droplets now become the shape that they should be, which is mostly circular, like not being stretched in any particular direction. You won't get it, I mean, you might not ever get it perfectly lined up, but it doesn't matter. It just has to look close enough, right? Close enough to the image over there. And that's pretty good. Okay, so almost at the end, check it out. Ha 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 ha. There we go. So if you want bigger or smaller bubbles, then, you know, tweak it. You want really small bubbles, go like that. If you want bigger bubbles, go like that. And honestly, it could really go either way. Condensation just kind of does its own thing. Sometimes you get the little tiny little bubbles on like a Coke can, and then sometimes you get the big bubbles that are like rippling out of it. So it's really, you know, however you want it to look. One thing I do want to change though is in the shading tab, right? This normal map here is converting our map into a bumpy thing that the shader can use, but it's also giving a strength to it. And out of the gate, it's set to 1, which is fine, and it works for most droplet things. But you can, these, basically it's like making the bulbous shape of it. So setting it to 1 is like these droplets are pretending to be huge, right? So, and I say pretending because there's no geometry data there. It's fakery so that the shader treats it like there is geometry. Anyway, if I turn this down though, you can see that I get a completely different effect. I get something that looks like, yeah, like what you would actually see on a glass, right? Not something that's like sticking out, like looking really weird and whatever. 0.2, I find just looks a little bit nicer for something like this. And there we go, guys. We did it. The final part. We did it. Well done, guys. Thank you for watching this level as something to finish on that is a little fun. I mean, it's not really that fun. It's not even really that interesting. But I figure why not? Because I know in the earliest donut series, at the end of each video, I did like here's something cool just to keep you interested. Let's pretend you want to make a stack of plates, because that is a pretty common thing when you're making a kitchen. We got one plate here. How do you make a stack? You could duplicate them, Shift D, Shift D. You could even hit Shift R after making one plate, and that will like repeat the previous action, right? But turns out there is an add-on, a modifier just for this, and it's called the array modifier. I'm only doing, this is just for fun, guys. You don't have to follow this if you don't want to. So with the array, this is basically taking an axis, and it's creating more and more versions of it along that axis. So the axis is currently set to X. If I set that to 0, and instead I make this one down here, which is the Z, the vertical axis. If I make that 1, you can see we now have a stack of plates. And I can change how close they are together by dialing that in. And we now have a stack of plates intersecting with our cup, and it looks like some weird art that you would see at a modern gallery. I went to one in Tokyo just the other week, and yeah, this feels right at home. This would fit into their gallery. But anyways, guys, if you want some homework, if you want a challenge, because some people have said like, oh, this is too easy, give me something hard. That's what she said. No. Then you should model a spoon. Model a spoon or a fork or something like that. And we're going to put it on this saucer here, or you can add it to the donut when we get to the donut. In level 3, we're going to be combining, and that's going to be the final level, level 3. The final, and that'll be the donut with the coffee against a brick purple wall. We'll do a little bit of animation. We'll do a final render, a little bit of compositing, and create that final image there. So if you're ready for that, go ahead and click here. But if you are watching this live as I upload them, there will be probably a week or two before the next level starts. But thank you for waiting, and share this with a friend if you found it useful. Thanks, guys. See you in the next video.